So, hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us this morning for this opening panel, which, building on the talks we've had from Sami and Bernhard, will reflect on how the landscape for European AI research and policy has shifted over the period that ELISE has been operating and is likely to shift over the coming years. We are being live streamed this morning, so please bear that in mind for any contributions. We're going to start with a bit of a discussion amongst panel members with some opening questions before handing the mic to you for any questions that you might have. I'm delighted this morning to have been joined by a panel of people who have been so deeply involved in the development of ELISE, and the European AI policy landscape. We have Petri Myllymäki, Professor at the Department of Computer Science of the University of Helsinki, Professor Neil Lawrence, who is Professor of Machine Learning at the University of Cambridge, Timo Harakka, Member of the Finnish Parliament, and Bernhard Schölkopf, Director of the Max Planck Institute for Intelligent Systems and the new ELLIS Institute, Tübingen. So we started this morning in Bernhard's talk by looking back to 2018 and the open letter that ELLIS published, making this central argument that AI was a strategically important technology that Europe needed to keep up in an international competition to develop that technology and to attract talent from research and industry, and that Europe really needed a mechanism for developing and nurturing that talent. Now, lots has changed technologically, politically, economically in the 6 years since that letter. And so I'd like to start by asking each of our panelists for their reflections on the current state of AI in Europe. Now, Bernhard, I know you've already kicked off that discussion, so maybe can I come to you first there? How would you describe the current state of European AI?
Can I come to you last?
Well, you were holding the mic.
So. I think we are still, so maybe I'll start with the good thing. I think we continue to educate or output the best students in the world, or among the best students of the world. I think the European education system is great, and there's a certain culture that I think is very suitable for this kind of research. So European students are welcome anywhere in the world, which means that many of them are getting recruited to America currently. So this, but I think the academic system still works well in terms of the students that get educated here. So I think this is still a good situation. Now for the students, as they choose the places where they do their PhD, this has become more complicated. We already saw this 6 years ago when we started discussing it, and I think it's just as true, or maybe even more true nowadays, that students pick their place not just based on the academic merits, but also on the overall ecosystems. We have to see that also the student population moving into our field has changed. It used to be only people who are basically interested in the fundamental problems of AI and machine learning. Now it's mixed with students who want to change the world, students who also want to make money. It's a field where you can earn a lot of money, and it's also simply more. So basically, everybody who used to study, or not everybody, but many people who used to study engineering, mathematics, physics, now go directly into computer science or go into computer science after their first degree. So there's a very large population. There's a huge amount of talent coming in, but they are picking their PhD places, not just based on academic criteria, but also based on where can they change the world, where can they build their own careers, which means that the competition has become even tougher for us. I think we have made progress. I think ELLIS is part of that. So the ELLIS PhD program has made a significant impact, and is really, I think, everybody considering doing a PhD anywhere in the world knows the ELLIS PhD program. I think that's a great success. At the same time, I think the overall situation in Europe, even though it has increased, it hasn't quite, or it has improved. It hasn't quite improved at the rate that's necessary, and probably not as much as some of the other places. Certainly not as much as in China, and maybe also not as much as in America. So I think the problems are are still there, but we still have great people here.
I haven't much to add to the academic dimension of Bernhard's analysis, but maybe it's not only a bad thing to have this cross-pollination between startups and business and academia in the so-called ecosystem. So when I look at this big picture as a politician, this is exactly what we try to achieve in Finland, for instance, to have that kind of ecosystem in transformative tech, AI, but also quantum and so forth. And I think it's very fruitful for all participants. Obviously, you will have to take care of the academic quality, but that to some extent is a given as well. So I'm also deeply concerned about the level of investment in Europe in AI and in all respects. We cannot compete with large big tech companies that one single company can devote $30 billion to AI. It is far exceeds what the European Union can contribute as a whole. But I think our strength is and must be the public-private cooperation, which I alluded to as well. So I think that with smart policies, with smart public money, we can kind of foster also the AI ecosystem in a way that will produce also great companies also in Europe. And this is particularly what I want to operate in.
Yeah, so fully agree. Maybe a couple of additional points. While I'm interacting a lot with the Commission and the European decision makers, the question I have been asked for the last 2 years or so is that why didn't you warn us that there's going to be this new great technology called large language models or generative AI that was created during the last 2 years? And you know, like for somebody like many of us who have been working in this field for decades, this is kind of a funny notion that no, this wasn't invented 2 years ago. Yes, there were great engineering developments, mostly about like how to scale the machine learning algorithms to these large-scale models, and that's one issue that where we are kind of behind in Europe. But I'm optimistic that kind of the basic science is still being developed openly, and Europe is very strong in there. Maybe one weakness we have that was quite interesting to me was that I was listening to Roberto Viola about a month ago in Brussels, and he was talking about investments. So clearly there's something to be done there, but like he was saying, like something like Horizon Europe, he claimed that it's the biggest funding instrument in the world. I guess it's in the order of 100 billion. And he was saying that we are not being bold enough, we are not investing boldly enough, that it is kind of we are very democratic and we want all the areas of Europe to be successful, so kind of we rather distribute the funding thinly to many places, but then is the level of ambition enough? And kind of we are mixing several funding instruments like maybe geopolitical support and support for excellent science. So we are using the same money to several purposes. So I think this was very refreshing coming from the top of Europe, that they also acknowledge that this is an issue, and maybe I hope that maybe things will change in the future.
So I was on a panel in Cambridge last week where I was asked which was more likely to develop smart AI. I don't know what they really meant by smart AI, China or America. And I said Europe. And I don't know if that's true, but I'm worried if it occurs any other way. So I hope it's going to be true, because I think these technologies are so important, so transformational, and could have such a beneficial effect on society that yes, the challenges Petri mentioned around there needs to be this sort of democratization, and we have to get everyone to agree. When you're deploying a technology of this type, if you don't have that kind of broad support as well, perhaps not in quite exactly the same way it's being distributed at the moment, you're going to deploy something that's very damaging for society. And there is no technical existential risk from artificial intelligence, but there's a very strong societal existential risk just from digital technologies in general, as we've already seen with social networking, which famously comes to us from the United States and has certain priorities about what should be done that don't necessarily incorporate what I often think are wiser values and perspectives on democracy and how we, including some of the things that do slow us up. But if we're in a world where it's the sort of fastest places to develop that deploy, then they will deploy in, I think, ways that we will see will be ultimately in the long term very destructive, if not in the next sort of 5 years, in the next decade, or the next 20 years. And we see this, so Jess ran a Royal Society working group on machine learning starting about 2015 that reported in 2017. One part of that was asking people what they wanted from machine learning technologies. And so they said a bunch of that. No, okay, so every single aspect they asked for, so improvements in health, improvements in social care, improvements in education, improvements in the way we manage our cities, even improvements in crime. People could see the benefits of these technologies. They could also see the disadvantages. These are normal people. They said extremely sensible things about what the pros and cons of these technologies are. The sort of people that at the moment tech CEOs are talking down to as if they couldn't understand these technologies. They can. They are not being allowed to participate in our development processes. And the only thing they said, please don't develop this. They said, please don't develop anything that is creative, that can write poems or create images, because that would be utterly pointless, because only humans can create. There's no point in having computers that do that. And if you look at progress across these last 7 years, the only area we've made significant progress is on the thing they asked us not to do. Now, having said that, this new technology does bring other advantages because it has a sense of humanity in some ways. It provides a new interface between us and the machine. So it provides a way that normal people can interrelate with the machine. And I think that the right place to build that technology, if we go all the way back to Mainz and Gutenberg and the 15th century, the printing press did a lot of disruptive things, but the most important thing it did is it democratized the technology of writing and enabled us to move forward, sharing knowledge across people, empowering people across society. What we've done since then is we've switched from that democratization to everything going digital. So all the control going to the computer, to the machine, putting all the power in the hands of large tech companies and undermining society through doing that. And I do think that this technology has the potential to reverse that process and get back to the situation that led to the Enlightenment, that led to the Renaissance, also led to a lot of wars, so you have to deploy it carefully. And the place that I think is best positioned in terms of the maturity which it brings, because it does try and bring consensus, which slows us up. But if you deploy these technologies without consensus, I think you end up doing enormous societal damage. So maybe my answer to this question that I was asked in this panel is more of a hope, because I think that unless it's Europe, the world's in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, I fully agree. And maybe just to clarify, and also I feel that I'm sometimes a kind of a translator between the Commission and the scientific community. So one thing that kind of opened my eyes was that I was telling somebody about ELLIS and like how we pool all the centers of excellence in machine learning in Europe together. And I was saying totally agree with Neil and like how we should develop AI and deploy it in Europe. But I was saying maybe we should focus more on finding the breakthroughs and who are the leading experts in Europe and be a little bit bolder supporting them. Obviously, I was advocating ELLIS and all this, but this Commission people said but we are already doing that. And I asked then, like, what is the definition of excellence? They say that if we give Horizon Europe funding, then you are excellent. So it's kind of circular definition, like, and that kind of clarified a lot. So the confusion maybe sometimes if you are claiming that ELLIS is excellent, then it's not the same level as like, yes, we get EU funding, which is like, I don't think it's very difficult to get that, as we all know that it's kind of whole industry on its own, that there are people and even organizations who are very professional in acquiring European funding. And I think that obviously we should do that too, but that's not how we kind of make these next breakthroughs in AI.
So we've touched there on the kind of the intersection of three different dynamics, at least in the community. One being the wave of public and policy interest in generative AI, and this feeling of policymakers having been caught by surprise at AI feeling so real all of a sudden. A second is this continuing gap between technology development and public benefit. So the sense that people aren't really feeling the benefits of AI in their day-to-day lives. And the third is this continuing sense of domination by industry. So AI really being a field that to many people outside research feels like it's being driven by big tech or being done to them by big tech. And in that context, when we think about generative AI in particular as an area for future development, what can Europe do to really play a leading role in that field when it's dealing with these complex social problems and just the competition from the volume of resources available in industry that will probably never be available to the public sector? And Timo, can I come to you first on that?
Sure, yes. You're quite right with that analysis. And what I think what Europe might bring to the table is a mindset of, first of all, willing to use AI for the good of humanity. So there are a lot of players that are taking this responsibility seriously. I was at the ITU AI for Good conference just a couple of weeks ago, and I was impressed by how many people are willing to use these resources for good. And I think Europe can be a lighthouse based on what Niels has said about our tradition of Renaissance and Enlightenment to kind of bring this to the 21st century. And this is something I want to work on. I'm also very happy that the Swiss have taken the ICANE initiative to bring these resources, and ELLIS is a founding member of ICANE, and also CSC, which is the host of Lumi up in Kajaani in Finland, is also involved. I think it's hugely important that these resources will be made available to also the global south, and we really need to work on it. Otherwise, what we see is this very scarce resource, which is compute, will be used in optimizing cat videos in social media. I'm not really looking forward to that kind of future. And I think it's very indicative when there are a host of international organizations that want to govern AI, and one of them is G7 that has its so-called Hiroshima project, or process rather. And there was a very simple questionnaire of G7 countries that, what do you think that AI would be most useful for? So you get only 7 answers from 7 the most mightiest economic players on the planet. And this questionnaire was very revealing because these answers were predetermined. So you had a ready answers, and you just had to choose. So 7 out of 7 chose that AI is very good for productivity and fostering innovation. Then from this preset answers, there was one proposition that perhaps it should alleviate climate change. 5 out of 7 chose that. So I don't know which the 2 others were thinking. But then there was also a suggestion that AI should be used to alleviate poverty and hunger in the world. And the result was 0 out of 7. So there certainly is a conflict of interest on a very global scale.
Thank you. So I would like to add a point that I think is important to also make to the politicians. And that point is that the development of AI, we don't know where we are in this development. So it's entirely possible that we're still very much at the beginning. So we might think we've lost this race already, or some politicians think we've lost this race. And I remember
I hate that idea. I hate the suggestion that we've lost the race already. So why are we there in the first place?
Yeah, so 6 or 7 years ago, I was in a roundtable with Angela Merkel, and there was a person sitting next to me, even a scientist working in an applied research lab. He said, this is not about basic research anymore. It's all about implementing what we have already. All the methods are there. I think the last 5 or 6 years have very much proven this person wrong. And now we're hearing the same arguments again. It's just about transfer. It's just about applying what we have. But it's quite possible that very fundamental advances will still come. And I remember in one of the first presentations when we had to pitch ELLIS to the politicians, I was quoting Jeff Hinton, who once said, the future depends on some graduate student who doesn't believe a word that I'm saying. So it's entirely possible that these developments will still come. And I think Europe is actually a good place for this kind of development, because we have a large diversity of grad students. They're excellent in terms of their education, and they have also the courage to disagree with what we are saying. But we have to make sure that we have to really let them go and give them the possibilities of doing that. And maybe to add also to what Timo was saying, I think also what's special about Europe is the motivation, what to do with AI, because at the same time, so we are, I'm collecting microphones to make sure that nobody else can speak. So we do have, so on the one side of the coin is we have the first AI regulation. We have a lot of people who are proud of that. I remember conversations with people from the parliament. They said, isn't it great we have the first AI regulation? And all the lawyers are proud of that. It's always like scientists are proud of having the first algorithm. The lawyers are proud of having the first regulation. And then sometimes we as scientists might say, well, we would rather be proud of something else. But actually, that's the one side of the European mind. We think everything through. We also see problems everywhere. And I think it's clear that there will be problems. Neil has talked about that. But it's also clear that there will be very positive surprises, and there will be new technologies, and they will address some of the issues that you mentioned. And if we look at the history, development of humankind, it's not a sequence of political decisions, but I think the large developments in history have usually been driven by technological change. We heard about the printing press, and AI is part of this tradition. So this will be one of these large elements. And the good news from that is it's not just problems that are coming up, but it's also positive potential. And in Europe, we have a mindset that people want to exploit this positive potential. We have fascinating startups, for instance, working on machine learning to optimize materials for carbon capture. I think this kind of developments are great. And I think they are probably ultimately our only chance to solve some of the large problems, such as climate change, which, as a naive scientist, I don't see a political solution to this coming. The mechanisms are just not there. But I do see very significant potential that we can have an impact. And I think we should communicate that for people who have this kind of goals, Europe is the best place to work, to do both basic research and bring it into application.
So I think, just to add to that, the basic research and bringing it into application is key, and the nature of the applications people are interested in Europe. I think the point Petri made was extremely well made earlier, that we unfortunately, we do have a bit of an industry of people that receive European funding and are set up to do that and tick the boxes of European funding, like there has to be an SME involved. And sometimes it feels like there's a certain class of SMEs that their entire business is being involved in European funding. And I think that relates to the sort of challenge that everyone has everywhere, and we need to address in Europe as well as everywhere else, which is how do we get these capabilities to the places where it's most needed to solve the problems that are most challenging? And that is partially about basic research, as Bernhard was saying, but it's also about education, support, and understanding. Like the sort of process of empowering people with this technology requires us to understand what they need out of it, what their existing jobs are, and how this technology can help. And I think so basic research is good, but alongside that, and I think the ELLIS Institute in Tübingen is an excellent example of this, you also need to have nearby businesses and public sector and third sector all talking together, all talking in an open and respectful way so that they can learn from each other. And if we do that, that's why Europe will succeed in the longer term. That's why, the danger in seeing it as a race is if you try and copy the United States or China, you're just going to come second or third because you're basically not playing to your strengths. It's like they've chosen the game being put as large amount of money in this as possible from a commercial perspective and fund the creation of cat videos or whatever the equivalent is in China. Whereas what you have to do is sort of say, well, that's not the right game. The right game is to develop this technology for the betterment of our society and the people in our society, and these are the priorities of those people, and we need to enhance that. Now, you might end up being slower to start, but in the end, if you don't do this, you do get to sort of a set of problems in society about leaving those people behind, problems that are leading to populism in Europe at the moment because of decisions that were made in the past about where we chose to invest and what we thought the problems were. And we need to not make that mistake again. We need to make sure that when we're making investments now, they're paying dividends in 10 years to the places where there really are challenges in Europe, not chasing around after China or the United States.
Maybe very good points. Maybe something that I learned while I have been working at the UN AI advisory body, and the final report is not yet out, but the interim report where we agreed in this large body of 39 people representing all the nationalities and sectors of different societies, we agreed that the basic fundamentals, how AI should be developed globally, what they are, and one of them was that AI needs to be built to support public good. So everybody agreed with this. OpenAI was in the panel, Microsoft was there, Alphabet was there. But everybody agreed. It doesn't say that AI should build to make a lot of money. It said for public good, and then another fundamental was that we need to be careful to protect human rights. And the European regulation was mentioned, so we can think differently, the AI Act, for example, but I think like the mindset and the intent is right there to protect human rights of people. Maybe the text is clumsy at some points, but how it is going to be implemented is a big thing, and I hope for the best.
So I just want to add on that. I mean, I think the AI Act has been really poorly done because of this race to produce. But if you look at things that were thought through in Europe, the Digital Markets Act, I think that's far more important than the AI Act, and it's far more enforceable, and it's based on experience from the last 20 years about what's going on. In the UK, the equivalent being the Digital Markets Competition and Consumers Act. These are the critical pieces of legislation because they're about looking at what's happening in digital markets and saying, oh, they're getting away with stuff that the companies aren't supposed to do because the markets are digital rather than classical, and we need to modify legislation to apply proper competition legislation in these areas. Arnold wants to come in on that. And I think that that's a really solid piece of legislation. I'm sure it's got minor flaws. The AI Act has major flaws. And, it'll be interesting how that pans out, but it's going to be unclear. The Digital Markets Act is very clear, and already Apple are screaming about it. And you can see the big tech are screaming about it because it's trying to force them to open up their monopolies on these things.
If I can quickly say that, great comment. And like in AI many times, like when people are starting to talk about something, then they say that this is something completely new, while it is not. Like we have seen this in the digital world many times in the last decades, some companies started to do these navigation maps, and they drove in our backyards and taking photographs without asking any permission. Search engines appeared. Did they ask any permission to? Can they produce snippets? Now OpenAI and companies are harvesting the internet data and then building these foundation models without regard of the copyright issues. So maybe it's time to grow up and say that now it's time to stop. I mean, like digital world, the same rules should apply there too, and we want to be treated fairly. I hope it's not too late, and I agree that we have several new acts in EU, and kind of in harmony, maybe we have enough weapons now at this point for a while to see what happens.
Yes, my period as a Minister of Transport and Communications of Finland coincide with 5 big EU legislations. Actually, Finland was president of EU when we started a lot of those, and indeed, one might say that perhaps that's enough for a while. But I totally agree that that's a significant piece of legislation, and much less spotlight on DMA. Digital Market Act or Digital Services Act, which is also very relevant. And my pet project, which I really worked hard on, was the Data Act, which would kind of require also the private sector to open up its data for public good. It has its flaws, obviously, because of intense lobbying, particularly from the German car industry. But anyways, having a larger view on data itself, or compute, of which AI is a very important part of, but still, if we talk about large language models, all attention is focused on LLMs, and that might be to the detriment of this whole transformational technologies itself. That we don't, we politicians are so kind of enthralled by the sexiest thing, which is AI, and we don't look at the bigger picture, which is data or compute itself as a resource, and also as rules of the game, how we can use the data for greater good. And I agree with Neil, that kind of mindset of a race to bring up production values or productivity out of that, and also our hunger to produce unicorns and big companies to kind of prove that Europe is still on the game is totally wrong-headed, and this is what worries me a lot.
Maybe I can follow up on this last thing. So I have the feeling now, so we've also talked a lot about the different pieces of legislation. So in Europe, we tend to have a strong focus on sort of, given some development, how do we steer it in the right direction? But maybe we have not focused enough on the question of how to get this development going in the first place, how to build ecosystems in Europe. So not just mechanisms for regulation, but also mechanisms to encourage development. And I wonder how we could get more attention to this kind of problem also in the Commission and in the Parliament.
Arnold, did you want to come in there? We don't have a mic.
Oh, thank you. I completely agree with, especially with your contribution on the laws, which laws are only those laws who are effective count. The rest is intentional. And so far in the AI community, we've responded to political worries. But some of them are really worries, like explainability and responsibility and transparency. They will come. We have to work on it. We have to work on it very hard. But we react to a public demand given to us by politics. But what the other side is, what would you worry about most 10 years from now on what we have produced will affect politics. For example, that Trump got very big
personalized, over-personalized data. And 10 years from now, as there is no way to get rid of all the data they have acquired every day, there are huge reservoirs of data somewhere in the world who could manipulate whatever they want, so to say. And these types of things that we should make not a response to policy, like we have to be responsible and we have to be open and transparent, but we have to really put on the agenda as an urgent need that if you accumulate everyday data and you don't throw them away and you put them in one place under the hood of one guy, and the one guy gets into serious economic trouble, then all the good wishes are gone and they will be sold to whoever wants it. So I don't want to scare, but it is our responsibility in the end to also think of the long-term effects of what we are capable of. And, yeah.
So I agree, and but my main feeling is that you look for institutional gaps. So going back, one thing that I've worked very extensively on is, and with Jess as well, data intermediaries, and in particular data trusts, institutions that manage personal data on our behalf. And because of the problems I think that Timo was hinting at, that data isn't the sexy thing, AI is, of course, it's been slow to get going. I mean, there's clearly challenges with starting institutions from scratch. But yes, precisely because you can see power is accumulating with large amounts of data. So when you think about what's going to happen in 10 years' time, when you look forward, my main model is to sort of think of Karl Popper and his notion of the open society, and in particular, the open society and its enemies. And I think there's a new sort of version of that book, which is the open society and its AI. Because the thing that is attacking the institutions that Popper is trying to defend from Nazism is not Nazism anymore. It's actually rogue capitalism combined with data accumulation, which is, I mean, so what Popper's, for the brief summary of what Popper says is, look, societies don't have to change through revolution. I think there was this period in history when people thought the only way that societies can change is through revolution, through French Revolution, Russian Revolution. That's the only way you can throw off the sort of historic challenges or inequalities. And Popper's saying, no, that's not how it works. What works, or what should work, you don't have to change the revolution. You could change through a set of institutions which contain what he calls piecemeal social engineers. And I would say it's not just institutions, it's everyone in society who are trying to work towards the right outcomes and are empowered to do so. And you would include lawyers, teachers, doctors, whatever, patients in this process. But the problem we're facing at the moment is that the route that those people had to be empowered to change society, which is through written works and books and moving literature, accountants, all written in books, all written in what happened in the UK around the Horizon scandal, that route has been taken away because today it's all the computer. And the computer is in the hands. The people who control the computer are basically 4 companies. And one of those, and as I think you were just hinting, one of these wannabe companies in terms of Twitter was just sort of sold overnight, and any of these companies could be. So even if you were to believe in the people that lead these companies today and believe they're well intentioned, it's another reading of Popper tells you that this is going to lead to some form of autocracy. Because you don't have the proper accountability and enfranchisement around those companies, which is why the Digital Markets Acts and their equivalent are so important, because they're not anything new. They're just sort of trying to get back to where we were sort of 100 years ago in terms of the regulation around the amount of power that a company can accumulate. Because the problem with the US-China dichotomy is at the moment it seems like it's just a choice of autocracies, because the US is very beholden to its large tech companies, doesn't seem, just as Britain was beholden to the East India Company and a large number of autocratic entities when it claimed to be a liberal democracy in the 19th century, but it was economically in hold to entities that operated autocratically across the world. The United States has got itself in that position. Europe is not in that position. China is already autocratic. So the only way between these two worlds that I can see is a European way that addresses exactly the challenges you're talking about.
So one of the challenges that a lot of policymakers grapple with in AI is that it's several things at once. It's a fast-moving technology domain in and of itself. It's a domain that can be applied across sectors in a wide range of applications, each with their own considerations. And it's a technology that's intertwined with really complex social and economic factors. And in some ways, it's easy for us to sit here and say, well, we have a vision for Europe as this lighthouse for AI that will benefit citizens, that will deliver real public good. And we think the way to get there is through this basic research that is excellent, that is inspired by the needs of real-world applications, and that is done in a way that connects to those applications and connects to practice. But we've started hinting already that, that isn't that easy to deliver in practice. And there's this question Neil raised about how do we get the capabilities that we need to the places that need them? And Bernhard, you talked about needing mechanisms to build ecosystems. So I'm wondering how we can make this tangible to the people in the room, members of the ELLIS network, to ELLIS itself. What do we need from ELLIS, or what does ELLIS need to do next to help build that vision?
Yeah, so this is this fundamental problem between mechanisms and intentions, and I think we have touched it many times today. I think Arnold mentioned it in his contribution. I think we've also seen it, I think Petri was saying before, politicians say all the time, we want to support excellence. I think this is dying again. We want to support excellence, but maybe the outcome is not necessarily excellence. So there's this distinction between good intentions and that might or might not lead to outcomes, and mechanisms that reliably, automatically lead to certain outcomes. And maybe just an example so if you work as a scientist and you have PhD students, you also want them to produce certain outcomes, and you can either try to micromanage them, and you take sort of any clever students, you have a certain project in mind, you micromanage them, you meet them every week, you tell them, you try to incentivize them to work on exactly what you want to do. And then this may or may not work, but it's a lot of work to constantly supervise them. So I would liken this a bit to, let's say, you put together an EU call. You say, I want more innovations, so I'm going to force every consortium to have a certain number of SMEs, and they have to commit, and they have to write a regular report. What is their strategy for marketing and for commercialization, etc. Now, the alternative approach as a PhD advisor is, you try to tell them what you are interested in, you try to tell them why you're interested in that, and then you see if that aligns with the interest of a student. If it doesn't align, you take another student. But if you find one where it does align, then you don't have to micromanage them. So, and in technology transfer, I think we have a similar situation. And I like to quote, so this was from an early meeting of I'm not sure I have the right term. We have a technology advisory board in ELISE, and one of the members is Hermann Hauser, who's a living legend, started some fundamental companies. Probably your cell phone contains something that was originally conceived of by Hermann Hauser and his people. So Hermann Hauser said to us, the only technology transfer the only form of technology transfer that he has seen to work is the transfer of heads. So it's naive to think you can force somehow scientists to by certain mechanisms, you can force them to commercialize things. But if you manage to put the right kind of people together, then things will happen automatically. Certain people will get hired into companies. Certain people will say, oh, I'm going to take some time off. I will start a company myself. In the end, the word for this is ecosystem. So we have to build ecosystems where this develops.
Yeah, thank you very much. I look at this from the perspective of an outsider, an entrepreneur. And so you mentioned transfer of technology. What I think is of very high importance for us as startups, as SMEs, is to know what is around. Because we hear the buzz from Google, we hear the buzz from OpenAI. We're not hearing the buzz from ELISE, not in terms of technology on the level that we can use. So it would be very helpful, I think, to look more into the direction of public communication and obtaining some kind of maybe thought leadership with the understanding of AI that you presented, that I personally very much like. So I think this is a very good path to go, but it is not sufficiently visible, in my opinion, in the public debate. One point. Second point, transfer. I think what also works very well is open sourcing technology, providing toolkits, putting them somewhere, providing documentation, and then waiting for people picking them up. This is what I use a lot, my team is using a lot, and what I see in many other companies. And this is something that, as a result of any project, should be considered. Thank you.
So maybe I can have a first stab at answering that. Yes, of course, we can't do the first thing. And what you're seeing from OpenAI and Google is often misrepresentation of what these technologies will do. It's a combination of marketing. It also achieves some form of regulatory capture. It's certainly got mind capture in the politicians. And one of the things it's doing is they are heavily pushing back against open source. And the approach, we cannot do marketing. We cannot do PR. In fact, it would be distortive of the scientific process to do so. But what we do is open source. And I bet you the technologies you're using are built to some extent on work done by ELLIS scientists. And one of the scandalous things is, of course, so are OpenAI's and Google's. And they never talk about this. And now they're actively trying to suppress it around the basis of security concerns. The only major tech company that is supporting it to some extent is Meta, and that seems it's almost single-handedly through the efforts of Jan LeCun. I feel that that's happening. Of course, Jan, I'm sure he's working for a large company, but he does passionately believe in these technologies, and he does for the reasons that you're saying. So I think it's a great point because we haven't talked about it so far. Open science, and there are issues about what open source means in the AI era, is absolutely critical to this type of transfer. And one of the challenges is, I think it can be viewed as an uncosted externality. So companies don't actually value it because they get it for free. Governments aren't valuing it. It's like the atmosphere because they don't realize if you don't sustain it, it's just decaying. And it's entities like ELLIS and many other academic institutions throughout the world that really drive the innovation of that ecosystem that enable all of this. And it's just not being paid for in terms of the downstream value it's generating. But of course, it's very hard to quantify. So we continue to support that. I think it's a nice topic, but I don't know if anyone else wants to say anything about open source or open development.
Sorry, Petri, but I can flag your importance in the Finnish Parliament on insisting this open source exemption from the AI Act for the good of the scientific community, but also for the larger good of smaller companies that could benefit. And I think we were successful in the end of safeguarding open source, which I think is hugely important. But I wanted to comment also on the fact that when Jessica was asking what Europe could and should do, is that in contrast to these autocracies of China and US, we do have this somewhat enlightened public conversation and democratic environment where we make these decisions. And this is in deep peril, partly of two issues that I mentioned in my book on data capitalism, which I wrote while being a minister. So if you're interested on layman's view on data and data capitalism, you'll find it for free in English PDF in my net site. End of ad. But what worries me as a former journalist as well is deepfakes and the distortion of what can be seen as facts. And this is something that will certainly demolish all democracies that we are depending upon on making these decisions. So something needs to be done on that sector. Verification efforts, all kinds of watermarking efforts, all kinds of even piecemeal efforts to try to fight this imminent danger is important. And while speaking of imminent dangers, I want to comment also the statement by ELLIS board last summer on the societal ramifications of AI. I think it's a very sensible, very useful position you took publicly. Perhaps it's not as well known and advertised as whatever Sam Altman utters, but it was very, very, I think, important at the time where during the around the UK's AI Security Summit, there was a lot of talk of existential dangers and all kind of sci-fi scenarios to bring down the discussion to the level of imminent and really existing real world challenges that we are facing right now.
Thank you.
About the open source, one of my favorite comments from Jan LeCun was that he was saying, like, people often ask, like, why is this AI technology developed so rapidly in the last few years? And he insisted that it's because of this openness, open source, open data sets, everything open. And now I get the feeling that maybe the public and the decision makers get the feeling that because of the scaling thing, that the US tech, like, they will now develop AI. But if we are now thinking of, like, what Arnold brought up briefly, like, it's easy to say that we need trustworthy AI, meaning like it should be more transparent, ethical, unbiased, robust, reliable, all that. So we don't have that, and that's also from the technical point of view, it's difficult to make it happen. Do we believe that even if a US company gets 10 billion investment more, they will make this happen, or is it up to the open scientific community to do it? Once again, I believe in the latter. And as a kind of a joke or an anecdote, I don't want to say who this was, but I was in a meeting where a big AI company, they were explaining that they are solving all these problems because they have these big models. They have found out that there are certain neurons that activate when it tells the truth, and then certain other neurons that activate when it tells the false. So you know, and you can also make it to tell the truth or make it to lie. So obviously, even the interview in this panel said, like, okay, and your stock just went up 10 points because of this comment. So I hope we all agree that like the future is not going to happen by just adding 100 billion more parameters and expecting it to solve all these trustworthiness issues.
Thank you. So I'd like to open to any further questions from the audience for the panel. One at the back.
All right, very much. Thank you, thank you. Words are going to come out of my mouth. I hope by the end you will extract a question from it. I'm just sitting there thinking about. All right. Next reincarnation of ELLISE or excellence as some kind of emergent phenomenon, or just thinking about from a personal perspective, I always thought, how could I also jump onto this AI bandwagon, get all the hype? And the things that I figure out is that I need to invent a time machine to go back like 10 or 15 years, start multiplying matrices in primary school. But thinking about that perspective, if you think about excellence as some kind of critical mass accumulating, if you start teaching primary school kids to multiply matrices and then having all these dinner parties and all kinds of penthouses and hosted by the new Medicis who sponsor all of these scientists and artists to come together, or philosophers to talk about all these boring things people used to do before the hype. There were people doing AI. If there's a large number of people in society doing that kind of stuff, especially in cities, do you think that would be some kind of new ecosystem for 2030 Europe AI?
So I think it's important for us that young kids understand that this is a cool area, that this is interesting, that it's great for them if they learn about mathematics, if they learn how to multiply matrices. I think there's still certain cultural issues that, for instance, I don't know how it is in other countries, but I think in some European countries, maybe sometimes girls find it less cool to mathematics, or they think this is a topic more for the boys. If that is the case, when we're already wasting half of the potential that we have of people that could come into this new field. And if we believe that many of the major innovations will come from young people, and I strongly believe in that. So you need people who are willing to violate anything else. And if you've been in the field for a long time, then you're very much socialized to the received wisdom. So you're more likely to fundamentally challenge something like this if you come as a very smart outsider. And we have to make sure that this stream of smart people entering the system doesn't stop. So I think we have a great stream in Europe, but we're probably not yet using the full potential. And part of it is education in these mathematical areas. And so this includes mathematics, it includes computer science, and computer science education shouldn't mean you learn how to use Excel or Word, but it means you have to understand what is a programming language, you have to learn what is programming. And nowadays it probably should also mean you have to learn what it means to be programming supported by an LLM and how to use all the tools that are around. So I think the kids, obviously, the kids are our future, and we have to invest in this future.
Thank you for the great question, which is cue to my second advertisement here. I very strongly recommend Hello Ruby. Go check it on your browser. Hello Ruby is a project by Linda Liukas, a Finnish author of children's books. And it's precisely meant to encourage girls into programming and computers and the rudiments of compute. And it's a great project, and I've had the pleasure of advertising this to all my ministerial colleagues and also people who are worried on how we get more gender balance on this field. And it's really a very fantastic project. Another thing we did when we had the rotating presidency of the European Union was instead of pens and pads and all these trash that you gave as souvenirs, we decided on an immaterial gift for all the EU countries. So we had a project by the Helsinki University called Elements of AI, the free course on the web, translated to all European Union languages. 24 versions of that one. Another thing that's made me very proud.
So we should make this compulsory for all members of the parliament. They should take a 1-week course on AI, since they are now spending a lot of time talking about AI.
Yes.
I think another question I heard in that contribution was related to our earlier question about Bernhard talked about the importance of finding intellectual synergy between partners and allowing those collaborations to emerge. But in such a complex landscape, it's really hard for collaborators to find each other, for SMEs to find universities they could collaborate with, for researchers to find people with real-world problem sets that they can work on. And I wonder if panelists might have reflections on what has helped them find collaborators in this environment. Neil, I know you've done.
Yeah, I guess one of the pleasures of being, so I came into this field because it didn't really exist in the 1990s, because there were a set of problems I was experiencing as an engineer in the real world, and I felt, that we don't have any answers to these. And then I heard about these neural network things, and they sounded like they might be answers. So I've actually spent my entire career trying to go the other way, which is, I have these solutions that people should be deploying. And I guess until about 10 years ago, they weren't. And that, I don't know how easy it is to do for young people coming through, but Bernhard likes to use this expression. I think statisticians also use, you can play in other people's back gardens because you have these techniques. And for me, that's the right way round. As long as we're talking about people wanting to be involved in AI, and creating, and the notion that intelligence is something to be solved, that doesn't lead anywhere productive. When we're thinking about, oh, I've got this really interesting problem and I would love to work out how to solve it. Oh, it seems there's some algorithmic decision-making techniques I can use that would really help support this problem. That feels like the right way around. I think that for the moment, though, we're just going to be in this period where people are going on about AI. It happened with the digital computer. Like, there's this thing called the Solow paradox, which Robert Solow said in, like, I think 1986. I see computers everywhere apart from the productivity statistics. Now, no one says, oh, we're going to go to a meeting. Look at all of you using computers instead of paying attention to the important things I'm saying. We don't actually reflect on the fact that we're using computers all the time. We don't even call it a computer anymore. It's a computer in our pocket. We call it a telephone, right? Because computers have been so integrated with our modern lives that we don't talk about them. Now, we'll know AI is successful when we don't talk about it, when there's some people working on it in the background. But, of course you're using AI. Don't be stupid. Why else would you do anything else? You don't have to publicize it or say, I'm going to use AI now. Everyone pay attention. You just naturally use it, as you don't say, I'm going to use a screwdriver to unscrew this, everyone. And that process, I think, takes about 20 years from what we see from the introduction of the digital computer. And it's as much to do with people adjusting to the technology as the technology moving it forward itself. And there's always this challenge that the technology tries to speculate which directions to go, but unless there are people focused on applications and doing what Jess said, trying to get out there and talk to where the interesting challenges are, they're not doing that. And for me, the most interesting challenges I've seen, the most interesting people in this space are all my colleagues working in Africa, who are far more clued up about these things than anyone in Europe or anyone in the United States, because they're actually trying to solve challenges that people care about. There's a lack of existing infrastructure, but they do have digital infrastructure. They have mobile phones. They've got a good community of people who are educating each other. They have brilliant ideas. And then they try and deploy. They see the real problems people face rather than the artificial problems that you find out from the middle person that's not directly involved in the application or the problems someone thinks someone else has. And so I love working with that community because most of my insights about these problem sets come from there. But it takes a long, long time to sit and listen, and you don't get, I've got very few publications in that area, but for me it's where all the inspiration comes from.
So maybe I can add in this context also a mechanism that we've developed at ELLIS to build networks of people that work together or get people to work together is the PhD program. So in the PhD program, you can either have two advisors in two different countries. Very often these are completely new collaborations through a student. You can have one advisor who sits in industry. It could be a large company, could be a small company. That student would be co-advised by an industrial person and someone from academic research. There's a new track. You can have a co-advisor in some application area in the sciences. It's called the interdisciplinary track. This is going to help roll out machine learning methods in all the areas of science where we're seeing dramatic changes with huge potential for AI. So that's an example of a mechanism. You put it in place and then it works, and it automatically works. And I would just want to mention in this context another mechanism that helps build a community and a culture that I once talked to John Hennessy, who used to be president of Stanford. I asked him about the success of the Silicon Valley, and he said he thinks apart from the fact that you have Stanford at the core, there's this much less talked about mechanism that in California you can't have a non-compete clause in the job contract. So this means you can quit your job at Google and next day you start at Facebook. This is not allowed in Europe, and that's really hurting us. So I think there's these little mechanisms, and sometimes the innocuous ones might have very dramatic consequences.
So Jess, you should say, Jess leads AI at CAM, which is trying to do this in Cambridge. So you should say something about how we're trying to do that.
I thought you were going to ask me to say something about non-compete clauses there. I'm thinking, gosh, where's this going? So Neil is referring to a new mission from the University of Cambridge called AI at CAM, which is our effort to really drive a new wave of innovation in AI for science, citizens and society. It's trying to build those connections between technology development and real-world practice. What does that mean at the moment? Well, we've launched 2 projects so far. The first is called AI Ideas. It's our interdisciplinary AI research incubator. So we've awarded seed funding to 5 challenge-led research programs for Cambridge researchers and their collaborators. Those are tackling real-world challenges that we feel are too often neglected. So it's the use of AI to improve diagnostics for women's health. It's the use of AI in evidence synthesis for policymakers working on challenges related to climate and nature. The development of responsible AI systems for use in local government. Efforts to increase inclusion and equity in language technologies, so making sure language technologies work better for a wider range of people. And there's always a danger in listing them because, thank you, Neil, responsible AI for diagnostics in brain and mental health. So we'll be working with those challenges over the next 2 years to help them develop partnerships and to scale their work. The other initiative we've launched is our Policy Lab, which is about generating insights, briefings or prototypes for policymakers, either wanting to use AI for their policy development and implementation, or who are engaged in the development of new policy frameworks for the governance of AI. So far we've been working with local government in Cambridge to understand how they want to implement AI in their work today, and with national policymakers to inform debates around generative AI. But we're early stages, so hopefully watch this space, and there'll be more to come over the next few years.
I think the key aspect of it is it's going out to the people who have the problems and trying to work backwards from those problems rather than imagining solutions, which is what the AI hype encourages us to do, coming back to the question, to sit there and imagine the type of problem that I would like to solve. And unfortunately, the focus on AI is encouraging, and I was talking about this with Timo yesterday. One of the problems we're seeing in policy is that AI is seen as a magical solution, and magical solutions appeal to people who don't like to do real work. So what you've got in... Not all politicians. And so actually politicians, I think, work extremely hard. I think it's a terrible, shocking job. I don't know why anyone does it. But I'm referring more to civil administrators in terms of people who are in government trying to fix things. So they're well-intentioned, but there's sort of, there's not 2 groups, but we could split roughly into 2 groups. People who actually get involved with the nitty-gritty of problem and work hard to solve it, whether that's like problems with, disadvantaged children and their upbringing, or some problem in education, and then other people who think that that's a little bit, actually solving problems is a bit hard. If there was a magic solution they could work on, then that would be much, much better, and they'd like to work on that, a solution that means that they don't have to get involved with people's actual problems. And which group do you think responds to a centralized call to let's have a central AI office that's going to magically solve all problems across government? And so you get this constant process where you're creating these new centers of fundamentally useless people, and while the actual people are out there thinking, oh, if only I could have this small piece of help. So our response to that, and it's driven by the African experience, is you have to go to those people who are really working on those actual problems and talk to them directly, not the people who are sitting in the center trying to dream up magical solutions.
Just add to that, it's also about trying to recenter the public interest in conversations about AI development, and recognizing that if we are going to bridge from tech development to that public interest, we need a shift in the systems that we're working with. There's no one point of intervention. It's about how the public have a voice in the research that gets done, how that research gets conducted ethically and responsibly, how we're working across disciplines to deliver real insights, how we're partnering, all of these different points of intervention that tackle what can feel like 1,000 points of friction in our innovation ecosystem between research, policy, and practice.
Coming back to Neil mentioned the computers and screwdrivers, and we were talking about the hype. Just a couple of comments regarding this, and when ChatGPT came out, I was called up to a emergency meeting at the university because the leadership was panicking, like, what are we, oh my God, what are we going to do? this computer writes the essays of students, so what are we going to do? And then at some point somebody said, like, we were discussing fiercely, and then somebody said, like, well, is this a new problem? I mean, the students earlier, they could ask their fellow student to write the essay, or there are even companies on the web that you can order essays for money. So it's not exactly a new problem, it just kind of scales up differently. So what did we do earlier? So we tried to explain to the students that very kindly that maybe your bachelor thesis or your master's thesis, nobody is actually interested in that. So it's you are not promoting science. The point is that you learn to do things yourself. So this is what we did earlier, and this is what we do now. We say that you can use any tools that you wish. You are using a spelling checker, but use them responsibly. And I was also, I mean, like, the part of hype is that we kind of lose track. We get blinded by the kind of the sudden development of things. So maybe I often try to say to people that let's cool down and think seriously, like, what is really new and what is going on. I was giving a talk to the local union of professors, and they were saying, like, oh my God, our profession will be gone because the AI will do all the research. And I said, like, is talking to a chatbot what you do for research? So kind of like, if that is in your science, then maybe you should be replaced. But like, I also, when I was talking to these people, I realized that all this Gen AI, I mean, generating, it's not even well defined. I don't know what it means. Generate content. Well, at least generating text seems to be part of that, and we do it as some kind of office work. But I found out that, isn't science, it's not about finding solutions, it's about inventing the questions. And is AI helping you? Maybe it's like a tool that can sometimes inspire you to think of something new, but it's like Bernhard was in the morning talking about this AI for science. And when I talk to some decision makers, they seem to think that this means that you talk to a GPT and say that, give me the cure for cancer, or how do we solve global warming? So I don't think, like, probably, did you use large language models in your astronomic work, or it was this good old engineering computer science stuff, I guess?
Before you go, just before Bernhard answers that, I was just imagining you had the emergency meeting in the university. Imagine the emergency meetings in the companies that were selling essays about what they were going to do. Now ChatGPT exists.
So yeah, I like your analogy with the spell checkers. So it used to be very important in your school classes that you get orthography right, and maybe a large fraction of your marks were determined by that. And then spell checkers came, and I think now we're all happy that our kids don't get graded on orthography anymore. And the other day, one of my kids came home with a bad mark in one exam, and I looked at the questions, and I don't know, there was questions, and in the end, I saw the way it was graded. There was a tick mark every time a certain point was raised, and I was thinking, God, these questions, they could have been answered by a language model. So it could be that every time such a new possibility comes, we also start updating our standards of what we think is actually a genuine act of creativity and insight. Which kind of reminds me of Neil's new book that he's going to talk about this afternoon. Whether there's something fundamentally human that's left if we have sort of factored out all the boring stuff that computers can do.
We have another question.
Hi. I wanted to make a personal reflection and a couple of comments. First, working on the research support side, don't you think that part of making European AI research excellent would also be making research management excellent and investing more resources on that? Also on the concept of attracting the best minds to ELLIS, maybe it should also be included attracting the best minds that can provide research support, which it seems to me that is almost excluded by definition, but it shouldn't be. When you talk about interdisciplinarity, the best buy-in that you can get from the European public would be to get the buy-in of the people that are supporting your research and helping to make it successful. And I don't see that, working in the ELLIS network. I don't feel that the research support is duly valued, and we don't have the career opportunities, etc. There's also, I think, something lacking in generally in academia and training, in the sense that there isn't a specific training for becoming support of research or science. And it's quite a specific, right? It's a very definite field. You need to learn a lot of things. So that would be quite helpful. But anyway, I just throw the glove there, that I think it would be interesting to see that if you want to compete with big companies that have very good people in promotion of the company, on the management side, on the promotion side, on the business development, you also want that for ELLIS and other networks that are working on research. You want to have very top people there. And for that, you have to offer them the opportunities, of course, and make the jobs interesting and appealing. Thank you.
I have a basic question about the regulation, because it has been said multiple times during the discussion that the problems that are born out of generative AI and these LLMs and the recent developments, they are not new. We are we already know that these things are coming, but still we waited for the big corporations like Google and OpenAI. Even at this point, Apple has to kind of submit to the developments, and they are kind of forced to use Apple Intelligence with the help of what OpenAI developed. And then it was said that the AI Act is kind of not right. It has some major flaws. But don't you think that the developments in AI should have been regulated on an early phase? And even at this stage, we have our concerns with the AI Act, the way it is being done. So don't you think that it's more important to regulate the development efforts, even the development is a little slow, rather than having very fast development that is not regulated at all?
Thank you. Who'd like to come in first on those? Neil.
So on the research support thing, I think you're absolutely right. It's certainly not critical. It's not unique to machine learning. It's a problem of universities. And I think it becomes a bigger problem with a distributed network of things. And it's something I know we actively think about on the board. And we, so any input you have on that, they're going to be gratefully received. And maybe Bernhard will come back on. Will you come back on that a bit more as well? On the second one on regulation, I think Rodney Brooks said, we struggle enough to regulate the things that exist, yet alone the things that don't exist. And the problem with the sort of notion of AI development regulation is you're regulating on the science side. I mean, certainly we have that for certain areas, and some people like to make a comparison with nuclear. I'm not sure we had regulation on nuclear development at the time they were developing it, though. I think that came after they worked out how it worked. So it's incredibly difficult to regulate development. And indeed, it's one of the foolish things that was said at the end of the AI Safety Institute, that will regulate the developers of AI rather than the deployers. Because what we do know is you can regulate at the deployment. So the misleading thing you've heard is this idea that there's no AI regulation, which is utterly untrue. I mean, there is no form of AI deployment you could mention that wouldn't be subject, apart from generating cats, but in these critical areas of health, education is actually one area where we probably need to look at what it looks like. But that's, again, because we don't know how it's going to be adopted. So the problem with the AI Act, from my perspective, is philosophically, it's trying to do the thing of regulate the developers rather than regulate at the point of deployment. And the difference in the UK approach, which dates back to work, again, that Jess was involved in, work from the Royal Society, British Academy, going back to, it's 2016, is it? Which basically says, well, you already have existing regulation in all these areas, and what you basically need to do is a gap and overlap analysis,
right? And this has said this in 2016. Has the UK government yet done a gap and overlap analysis? No. And the reason is because every time this comes up, someone says, we need to regulate this new technology. Well, yes, but we know that you always regulate in deployment, not in development. I mean, we don't have examples of doing it in development. So while that might come up and we should keep an eye on it and we shouldn't reject it, the problem is everyone keeps saying that's what you should do when the whole history of policy and regulation says, no, that's not what you should do. And once again, we've seen the UK go down that rat hole because these people emerged out of the woodwork saying exactly what you've just said. We need to regulate this. Rishi Sunak flew to Japan saying we're going to lead the world on guardrails for AI after his chief advisor had met with Jeff Hinton. And where is the UK in terms of new guardrails? I think a year and 3 months later, it's not changed its regulation at all. Because after a lot of thought and analysis, they realized, oh, the people who've been advising us have already thought about this, and the laws such as the DMCCA and the DMA are already taking account of these things and already designed with these technologies in mind. So just because they don't mention AI, the reason they don't mention AI is because it's very difficult to define. And people prefer terms like algorithmic decision making. I've gone on way too long on that, though, so I should maybe pass to Bernhard on the support issue.
Yeah, I think you are bringing up a very important point, and it's something that's not easy to address in publicly funded institutions. So we've been suffering from this situation also. Just one example, one of my assistants, so we try to involve our assistants running the science, supporting the science also in events, and one of them, for instance, once went along to a conference that I was co-organizing. And then through a certain chain of events, a year later, she got hired by DeepMind. And of course, DeepMind pays much better than an assistant in a Max Planck Institute. And now I just met her recently. A few years later, she's managing 3 DeepMind labs across America. Not managing scientifically, but managing in an administrative sense. And she was a great person. So it's difficult to offer career paths for this kind of people in public systems. And you can ask yourself, why is that the case? And I think maybe it's a little bit, some element is similar as in science. If we're talking about that we want to support excellent people, it means we're giving something extra to the top performing people rather than distributing it uniformly. And it's always easier to distribute things uniformly. We suffer from this in Europe, of course. And it's the same in terms of administrative people. So if you want to give someone something extra, it means the others don't get it. And that's always hard to justify and hard to implement in public rules. Now, currently we're setting up the ELLIS Institute in Tübingen. We're trying to do things better. There's also constraints because the administration is paid by public money. But for instance, we have one person now in the administration who he has a PhD in machine learning. I think he could have easily done a scientific career in machine learning, but we felt it's important to convince some people like him that he could potentially have an even bigger impact if he creates conditions in which science can excel and development can flourish. And I think we have to really reward this. If some people dedicate their careers to saying, I'm going to have a bigger multiplier by making sure that other people are productive. So this has to be rewarded and acknowledged. And I think it's something that we have to keep in mind. And maybe also if you have ideas how we could do this in ELLIS. I mean, I think there are some outstanding administrators in different places contributing towards building ELLIS. And we don't have a way, we now have a PhD award in ELLIS, but we don't have a way to reward this kind of service. And I think we're open to ideas.
And maybe one thing we probably don't do enough, and love your suggestions on this, but we also see it with other areas, is bring that community of administrators together and support them in the way that we support scientists to exchange ideas and experience, because that's, in these straitened circumstances where there's less money, that's one of the things we can always do, actually, is bring the group together. So that's something I think we can think about, isn't it?
Do we have a time constraint? Right. I try to be brief because regulation is exactly my domain, but there are 2 things that infuriate me in political discussion. The first one I already mentioned is that we've already lost the game to the US. So I heard people who are versatile in technology issues saying this when they were running for the European Parliament. I said, well, okay, if that's the case, so why are you going to Brussels? Why don't you hide in a hole in the woods? Because we already lost the game. Second thing that infuriates me is that slow, old, tired adage that Europe regulates, US innovates. Well, the reason why US doesn't regulate is that they are patently incapable of doing so. They don't even have a federal privacy law as which could be comparable to GDPR, and they have AI regulation on state and even New York City level. I'm not sure that's going to be very, very workable. So I think smart regulation is exactly what's needed. And one point, obviously, regulating an emerging technology is devilishly difficult. But I'm glad that it's this way, that we have innovation first and legislation later. Otherwise, it'd be problematic. So what we try to do in the Finnish legislation, and I hope the European Union will follow, as in these gaps and overlaps review, is that we humbly acknowledge the fact that we probably need to adjust and change legislation in near future. So we will have to kind of draft such legislation that has such process embedded in those paragraphs. So it requires a review within a year, like AI Act does, and that we will act upon it and we will review and modify it as we go to kind of acknowledge that it's not set in stone, well, and we'll try to be helpful instead of trying to make things more difficult.
Maybe I can add, I've always been impressed by the Finnish ecosystem and the Finnish capabilities in technology relative to the size of this country. You could easily imagine an alternative universe where Finland is a country that's not really on the map, but technologically is an outstanding hotspot, a great ecosystem. And now, after having sat next to you for 1.5 hours, I have the feeling it's also related to the kind of politicians that you have in Finland.
So we're coming to the end of our time on this panel this morning, but given we started with a reflection on where ELLIS was in 2018 and the story so far, maybe we can finish with a reflection on what next. So if we look ahead to 2030, what would you like to have seen ELLIS achieve in the next 5 or 6 years? Timo, can I come to you first?
Well, actually, I think it's best for me to excuse myself also on practical grounds, because I have a vote in my committee starting in -3 minutes. So I better get to my day job. But thank you for this opportunity. It's been really enlightening and inspiring. Thanks so much.
Where should ELLIS be in, when did you say, 2030? So something like humbly the leading network in AI globally, and everybody knows it and everybody wants to join it and come to Europe.
So I think there's a shift that I think is going to occur over the next 5 years that maybe we should get conscious of, that maybe we'd shift, I'm checking Bernhard's face as I say this, maybe we need to shift from a defensive posture to an offensive posture. So I think when we first created the network, it was very much because we had this sense that Europe was being left behind and the great work in Europe wasn't being heard about. And the idea behind ELLIS was to bring the excellence together and put that on the map. And I think, particularly with the launch of the ELLIS Institute Tübingen last week, we've seen that vision coming into place. And it takes time. It takes time to have done that. But maybe on the one of the things I'm reflecting on is that we need to sort of, now we've established that, we need to make sure our voice is being heard more publicly. Timo mentioned the statement the ELLIS board released around existential risk. I think we released that, but, he said more people should know about it. And I'm thinking, well, maybe more people should know about ELLIS overall. I mean, people do know about it. And maybe more of this, maybe that's where the PR comes in from the question earlier. That it's not just about protecting what we've got, but it's about projecting what we've got. From protecting to projecting. Oh, I like that.
Yeah, so my hope is that within these 5 years, the ELLIS PhD program will be the leading PhD program in the world, the most attractive, that attracts the best students in the world. I think we're on track to doing this. We just follow the current path. I hope that in 5 years also we will have a set of, let's say, 5 ELLIS institutes across Europe. And I think there's a credible path towards this goal. If we manage to continue to develop the PhD program as it is developing, I think it would be very hard for politics not to support it. So, and I think there's already discussions. There's been discussions between Germany and France, and I think other countries have also said they would really like to support this, because right now it's entirely self-funded. So the second thing is people will see how the ELLIS Institute in Tübingen is developing. People will see that we're getting outstanding talent. We're getting outstanding PIs from all over the world that we wouldn't have attracted otherwise. So people will see that this kind of investment is an investment that pays off, because there's this huge multiplier if it helps create ecosystems. And other countries will say, wait a second, I also want an ELLIS Institute. And I think then it will take, gather a lot of momentum, and it will become a no-brainer to do something like this. And I think at some point, so the start was non-trivial, because this is entirely a grassroots organization. And maybe sometimes politicians prefer if they come up with something that they can found, and then they cut the ribbon at the opening ceremony, and they design the procedures, and it's associated with them. So it's different in this case. It was founded by scientists. But I think there's the increasing realization that it's worth investing in this. So I hope that within 5 years, we will have a structure of at least 5 institutes, maybe 50 units across Europe. Maybe there's going to be a center of high-performance computing, which could be anywhere. It could be somewhere in Finland where we have abundant water power and we can do this sustainability. There will be access to compute both for these research labs and for European startups and companies. And I hope that people will then look back and say, actually, the point where things started to turn around was when ELLIS was founded.
Great, thank you. And thank you all for joining us this morning. That's the end of our time on the panel. So please join me in thanking our panelists and Petri and Chris for hosting us this morning.